Today, we're going to continue this series, which we're looking at the patterns that Jesus had in his life that he did regularly. And as we begin this new year and continue in it, that we have these patterns. And today, we're going to look at patience. We have looked at solitude, and we talked about that, and that's being quiet in your life sometimes. And then we looked at Sabbath, and then we looked at simplicity. All of them start with S. Unfortunately, I couldn't find another one with S, so this is patience, okay? But patience is very necessary. There's a huge amount of data to prove how the next generation is becoming more impatient. That's not always true. Some of us are just as impatient as the youngest. But I know when I was growing up, so anybody identify this, if you're going to watch cartoons, when did you watch cartoons on television when you were a kid? Saturday morning. That's the only time they had. Can you imagine, you could only watch what you wanted to when it came on. We live in a world of on-demand, everything, that you just pull it up if you want to see it, and if it doesn't load in a few seconds, I estimate that Amazon, a lot of us shop on Amazon. They did this estimation that if Amazon loaded 1 second longer, in a year's time, they would lose $1.6 billion. If the page loaded 1 second later, why? Because people are impatient. They don't want to wait. We want it now. We want it bam, bam, bam. You know, I used to work at J.C. Penney's, okay, for a time, and we had a break room, and I'd go in the break room, you know, and I would go to warm up something in the microwave, and I always noticed that there would always be about 4 or 5 seconds left on the microwave, and I had to reset it to cook my food. Why is that? Is that because somebody was warming up their lasagna and they got it to the precise second and stopped it? No, it was because they heated it for a minute and couldn't wait and stopped it. Because they couldn't wait a whole minute. And so you have to reset it every time. You know, in this town, pretty much if you are behind somebody and they're light turns green and nobody moves, you know, probably after a few seconds, somebody might honk to say, let's get it going, you know, let's not have a traffic jam here. But if you're in a place like New York City, people don't honk their horns just to get traffic moving. They honk their horns to shout. Basically, they're just going, because they're angry. They're impatient. The definition of patience is the capacity to wait for something or somebody, which is the next slide, to wait for something or somebody without complaining. Can you do that? Don't poke somebody next to you. Can you wait for something or somebody without complaining? That's part of what patience is. And in the Bible, the word for peace is macrothumos. This is in many different places. This idea of having peace in your life and not in being impatient is macrothumos. And that comes with two words. Macro means kind of big or long. And then thumos means rage or anger, which is the next slide. Macro means long. Thumos is rage or anger. And so the idea is, are you like a firecracker with a short fuse? And you go from not unhappy at all to boom? Or do you have a long fuse? You know, I was talking with a counselor the other day that has a PhD in working with people and therapy and stuff, and she had this as an aid. I just put them together and took a picture of it. So these are the different levels of anger. You know, I guess 1 would be great. 2 would be a little bit upset. 3 would be a little more upset, starting to feel aggravated. 3, getting angry. 4, very angry. And 5, blow up. How long does it take you to go through those things? If you thought of it like a volcano, a volcano, okay, that's, the beginning of seeing something coming out of the volcano. And then the next one is you see much more. And then the next one, you erupt. And then the final one, you're fully erupted. How long does it take you to go through those stages? The Bible says you should have macrothumos. You should have what's called peace. You should not just blow up. Impatience is not good for us. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your blood pressure. It's not good for your heart. It's not good for your faith. In fact, if you want to be good at stuff, a lot of times, look at creativity. When do people get the best ideas? Not when they're working. Usually it's when they've taken a break. When they're in the shower or taking a walk with the dog, and all of a sudden, that's what it should work. That would work. But we live in a culture now where we don't ever take time like that. We're always impatient. Hurry up. Now, it's almost like a superpower, okay? Patience. They'll never put it in a superhero movie. This is Patient Man, okay? I can't really point to this being patient because it's like you see the result in a spirit of peace, But there's an episode in Jesus' life. I could look at several, but I want to look at this one in Luke chapter 24. I'll set the context for you. This is after Jesus had gone through the crucifixion, on Friday night. This is Easter week. And on Friday night, he had the Passover supper with his disciples, and then he was tried and crucified, and then, he rose on Sunday morning, and then it's Sunday afternoon. And there's 2, it's part of not the 12 disciples, but the people who were alongside the disciples, like the next level of followers of Jesus. And it's the afternoon after the resurrection, and some of the people who had been following Jesus are starting to go home. It's starting to kind of decline. And so Jesus' response, he could do a lot of things. He could have appeared to everybody. He could have had a huge experience where thousands, hundreds of thousands of people would have seen him after he died. Instead, he goes for a walk with 2 people. Okay, so these 2 people, they were walking to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles, from Jerusalem. And by the way, the Methodist denomination has something called the Emmaus Walk. Has anybody here ever been on that or experienced that or heard about that? Yeah. It's a really cool spiritual kind of encouraging retreat experience, and it helps them spiritually, and it comes from this account of when Jesus spent time with his people walking on this road. Now, he's walking 7 miles with them. How long would it take you to walk 7 miles? It'd be about, I guess, from here to Walmart. We would have to take lunch with us. Okay, it would probably take most people in the mountain regions about 3 hours at least to walk like this. And so they were walking this 7 miles, and as they were walking, they started talking, and they discussed with each other about everything that had happened, because a lot had happened that weekend in Jerusalem. And they're not just meditating on it, they're kind of arguing about it. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus came up behind them and walked along with them, Jesus. And they were kept from recognizing him. And there was something about the way he looked. They couldn't see him. I don't know. I don't think he was like dressed, incognito. I think something that God did, he kept them from recognizing who he was. And so this stranger starts following them, and he asks them, what were you talking about as you're walking along? And they stood still. They stopped walking, and their faces were downcast. They weren't rejoicing. They were still upset about Jesus getting crucified, and they didn't know what happened really. And one of them, named Cleopas, asked this guy, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" Which is the most ridiculous, ironic question to ask Jesus. In fact, nobody in the world knew more about what had happened in the last 3 days than Jesus. He knew exactly what happened. And they said, "Are you the only one around here that doesn't know what happened?" And truth is, he's the only one that does know what happened. But he is wanting to teach them something. And so he says, "What things?" And so they start telling him what they understand about what happened at Easter. And they say, "Well, it's about Jesus of Nazareth, who he is." You ever had somebody talking about you when you're in the room? And they said he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. They don't say that he was the Son of God. He was a prophet. And the chief priest and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. That's what we hoped for. But, it didn't look like that happened. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning. This is the same day Easter happened. But they didn't find his body. They came and they told us they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. But they're women. And some of our companions went to check him out, see if that was true. And they found it like the women said, but they didn't see Jesus. They didn't really see Jesus. So we don't really believe it. It sounds kind of crazy. And so Jesus is direct with them, even though they don't know who he is. He says, "How foolish are you? How stupid are you guys? How slow to believe? It's all written down. It's all in the Old Testament. All the prophets spoke about what happened." And he says, "Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Imagine walking 7 miles with Jesus and having Jesus tell you about what it all means. Wouldn't that be interesting? That would be really good. And so these two guys, we don't even know one of their names. And Cleopas, we don't know anything about him but his name. But they're walking and talking with Jesus, spending time patiently listening. He asks them questions. And so they do this 3-hour walk. And as they approach the village of Emmaus, where they were going, Jesus continued to go on as if he were going to go further. But they urged him and said, "Oh, come on, stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day's almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And now he changes from being the one that is the guest to being the head, because he's Jesus. And it says, when he was at the table with them, he took bread and he took the lead. And he gave thanks and he broke it and he began to give it to them. And that's when their eyes were open and they recognized who it was, and he disappeared from their sight. Pretty much a freaky experience. They recognized who he was. They said, during this act, which I think was the Lord's Supper, they say, "Oh, that's who he is." And imagine everything they've been talking about. And now here Jesus is in front of them, and then he disappears, and they ask each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures?" They had this burning, passionate experience when they heard him talking, just like it happens today if you listen to Jesus. And they got up and they returned. They didn't stay in Emmaus. They just had to go back. They had gone home and they decided, nope, we're going back. And we're going to tell them we just saw Jesus. And they found the 11 and those with them assembled together. And they said, it's true, the Lord is risen. He has appeared to Simon. He appeared to us. And then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus recognized them when he broke the bread. Jesus took time to be with these two people. And Jesus wants to take time to be with you and me. And so a couple of things I get out of this, I think, a few things. First thing is to be patient with other people. Jesus was patient. Are you patient with other people? You know, if you look at Jesus, he was patient with the disciples and the people who came alongside. He spent 3 years pouring himself into these people, and over, they did not get Jesus. Imagine spending 3 years with people and them really not getting you, really not understanding. One time I was in the Outer Banks and we went to see the lighthouse there in the Outer Banks, and that was back when they had the storm, and they had this island that formed off the Cape. It was called Shell Island. Okay, and so we were up there, and we had a park ranger with us, and we're at the top of the lighthouse, and the park ranger spent about 25 or 30 minutes telling us about things, and mostly telling us how you shouldn't go out to Shell Island because the current was so strong, people would get hurt. And so he finished his talk, and he said, is there any questions? And one of the guys raises in, and yes, sir. He said, so when's the best time for us to go out to Shell Island? They didn't listen. And I think Jesus had that happen over and over again with these guys. In fact, there's one scholar named Wrede, W-R-E-D-E, who says that the disciples really weren't that dumb, but somebody else wrote that in to help explain why people didn't follow Jesus. But you know, they were. I've been around people, and I'm like that sometimes. I just don't listen. I just don't get it. And Jesus could have easily blown them off and said, okay, that's enough. You know, I was reading a story about somebody that I didn't know. You know, John Newton wrote the song Amazing Grace. And if you read his story, John Newton was an Englishman in 1748. He wrote this famous hymn, Amazing Grace. But you know, he underwent a spiritual conversion later in his life. He was a ship captain of a slave ship. And I thought that, well, he had this conversion, and then later on, he became a minister, and he read that. Well, he did. But if you look at the time frame carefully, he actually wrote that before he gave up being a slave captain, historically. And I look at that and think, gosh, how could somebody? He actually had Bible studies on the deck of the ship while slaves were underneath. How could you do that? And I think about that, and I think, well, you know, people do ignorant things. We're products of the culture we live in, and then the culture the disciples lived in. They thought the Messiah was going to come and be like a warrior, and he was going to take over the Romans and conquer the Romans and set them free. And so Jesus had to correct them. He had to patiently correct them. He had to spend time with them. And so he walked these 7 miles with them. So you need to be patient with other people. Before you start judging other people and think, well, I can't believe how ignorant they are. Well, the Bible says the greatest commandment, love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You love your neighbor. So be patient with yourself as well. I know many times we think, okay, I'm never going to do that again, or I'm going to stop doing that, or like this week, I knew I was going to preach on patience, and God has tested my patience this week more than any time in the last few years. Okay, and I look at myself and I think, gosh, here I'm going to preach on patience, I can't even have it. You know, but God is working in your life where sometimes you can't see it. I found this story. Every once in a while when you wander around Williamsburg, you'll see a bunch of bamboo. And I didn't know much about bamboo, but here's a little something about bamboo. When you plant bamboo, after 1 year, nothing comes up. Second year, nothing comes up. Third year, nothing comes up. If you were planting bamboo, after 3 years, somebody would come by and they would say, how's the bamboo coming? And you'd say, nothing. 4 year, nothing. 5th year, explosive growth. 3 months and 15 feet in 3 months. After 5 years, what's happening? Well, all those roots are growing out. Things are going on in the structure of the bamboo plant that you can't see. And in your life, you may look at yourself and say, I'm still the same. I haven't changed any. But God is working in your life. And he's not going to give up until it's complete. And so be patient with yourself, be patient with others. And I say be patient with God, but what I'm saying is maybe be reverent with God. But take time to spend with God. Often we don't take time to spend with God. We're not patient enough. We want to know right now. There was this guy who's written a really profound book on time management called Oliver Burkeman. And he tells this story about, he went to this art gallery. He was at Harvard University taking some classes, and he was taking a history class of art by a woman named Jenny Roberts. And she made her new students do this assignment, which is, he hated it. He had to go to this art gallery there at Harvard, and he had to stare at this painting. Okay, it's called Cotton Merchants in New Orleans. There it is, for 3 hours. Can you imagine to have to sit and stare at that painting for 3 hours? He said it was torture. He said he sat there and he looked at it, and he looked at it and looked at it, and he said, okay, I'm probably about halfway through. And he looked down, it was 17 minutes. And she knew that this was painful. She knew this was like torture, but there was something about forcing yourself to really examine something and to focus on it. When is the last time you really focused on God? When you really read the Bible and you had patience and you just read it and took time. This last weekend, yesterday, we had this prayer breakfast for the jail ministry at Virginia Peninsula Regional Jail. And one of the things they did in the breakfast is they had a testimony from a woman who'd been an inmate there. And it was very riveting to me. And she told this story about how she had gotten involved with painkillers and it led to other drugs, and that she had become, into that so much that it was destroying her life, and how she'd been in and out of jail, and how she finally got sentenced for like 2 years. And that this program, where they were talking about, which they do, called the Good News Jail Program, they give out these questions, and they're packets of questions. And you have to study the Bible to answer the questions. Well, the first few times people gave them to her, she blew them off. She wasn't interested. But she did later, because she'd gotten to the kind of the bottom of her rope, and she didn't have anything else to do. She didn't want to play spades, which they played cards every night. And she didn't want to watch TV, which was just ridiculous. So she started doing these packets. And she ended up doing hours and hours and hours of Bible study. And she wasn't a Christian. She started reading the Bible. And she just focused on it and focused on it. And it changed her life. She came to meet who Jesus was. And through these, she focused, and it developed through that patience. And it was kind of enforced patience. But it changed her life like nothing else. And I would say to you today, do you have patience with God? Do you have patience understanding that what you want may not be what he wants. And if you've taken time to examine that, and like that guy sat for 3 hours looking at a painting, when's the last time you took a long time to look at a passage, to pray about what it means for your life? And so I don't want to just tell you, okay, be patient, be patient. Here's just a few ways to develop patience in your life. First off, pray for it. You know, God wants to give you patience. And so pray that God will give you patience. Say, Lord, you know, if that's the thing for you, say, even if it's not, because it's a thing for all of us, say, Lord, give me patience. Secondly, you might practice something called creative waiting. What's that? Well, that means when you take space to think something out before you move forward. For instance, let's suppose that you had a leak underneath your sink, and you think, well, I got to call the plumber. But, you know, it's possible, even though you don't think you can, you could fix it. So how would you do that? Well, you might, clean out everything underneath the sink, maybe take a towel, put it under the sink, get comfortable, lay your head back, and just look at it. Don't start turning things and moving things and knocking things with a hammer. Just look at it and spend time and say, well, does it look like there's a leak anywhere? And what could it be? And then maybe turn the water on, look at it, and see if you figure out what's going on. You know, it's not just waiting to do nothing. It's being patient and looking at something, looking it all out. 3, embrace the power of stopping. You know, a lot of people emphasize, which is true, sometimes if you need to get something done, you got to just start. You know, you got a report you got to do, just start it. And that's true, but there's an American psychologist, Robert Boyce, that studied the writing practices of people who wrote in academic world, and he discovered that the ones who produced the most writing and the best books were people who took breaks. And sometimes if you just keep working on something long enough, you do not make progress very well. And so you have to stop once in a while and then come back to it. 4, and this is hard for people, young people today, do one thing at a time. This idea of multitasking is always a good thing. No, it's not. Don't ever drive and text. Don't do that. You cannot focus on more than one thing. And the more things you have going on at once, you just bounce to one to the next. And it's kind of like a person who is a musician learning a difficult piece of music. And every time they get to the difficult part, they skip over it. You won't make any progress. Focus on the difficult part. You know, learn to do one thing at a time. You know, be patient with others. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with God. Look at this story of Jesus being patient, walking 7 miles with these folks. You know, Revelations 3:20, the end of the Bible, Jesus says this. God says this, here am I stand at the door and knock. I don't stand at the door and kick it in. If anyone hears my voice, because a lot of people aren't going to hear it. A lot of people don't hear him knocking. And opens the door. I will come and eat with that person and they with me. I'll spend time with them. And so all of us today, we need to do that. We need to be patient. We need to listen when the knock happens. When Jesus is, let him in.